Uh, One of the easiest ways to manage invasive species is through prevention. So, by understanding how invasive species move from one area to the next, it can we can make efforts to stop or slow down the next major invasive species. So today we're going to talk about. We're going to start with the foundation of what is an invasive species. Um, we're going to talk about some common ways invasive species move, how to help slow the spread, and we'll also get into a couple of case studies as well. So, what is an invasive species? An invasive species is a plant, animal, fungus, or microbe that is not originally from a geographic region and can cause harm to human health, the environment, or the economy. So, what does that mean? Human health, harm to human health could look like one of our invasive species, poison hemlock. And ingestion of that plant can cause respiratory failure or muscle paralysis, or in really extreme cases, it can cause death. Whereas if you get dermal contact with it, the saps can cause some pretty acute dermatitis, rashes, itchy skin, things like that. Environmental harm, an example of this would be our bush honeysuckle, Asian bush honeysuckles. Then those can cause massive changes to our native plant communities through a lot of different means, such as it has a longer growing period. It has really dense foliage, so it shades out everything underneath it. And then it also has a characteristic called allelopathy, where it changes the soil chemistry around the bush honeysuckle, which makes it difficult for native plants or really anything that's not honeysuckle to grow in and around in those honeysuckle infestations. So this can reduce like our local plant biodiversity and insect populations, and then that echoes throughout the food chain by providing fewer food and habitat resources to everything else in the ecosystem. And then economic harm. One example of that would be zebra mussels, which I'm sure a lot of us have heard of zebra mussels with as prevalent as they are here in the Midwest. Um, Zebra mussels are tiny little mussels that encrust boat propellers and clog ports, and they can grow all over the bottoms of boats, all over pumps and other water infrastructure such as lift stations, intakes, piers, and all of this heavy growth results in increased repair and maintenance costs, destroyed equipment, and increased fuel consumption because of lower hydrodynamics on the bottom of the boats, which all of that definitely costs money. But a lot of times invasive species they don't just cause one type of harm. They can have a lot of unexpected results, um, or a lot of unexpected issues that they cause. For example, there's the economic impact to remove plants that cause harm to human health, like poison hemlock. We obviously don't want that growing in our roadsides, and it's a prohibited plant. So there is an economic impact to actually remove those. Whereas on the other side, zebra mussels, which cause primarily economic harm, they have really sharp shells. So they can cause harm to humans by if they're in the water where we're out and wading around. And invasive species have cost the world an estimated $1.2 trillion in the past 50 years. And that's as of 2021. And things are not getting cheaper, of course. Um, so here in Indiana, there are more than 120 officially recognized and regulated invasive species, and that's according to the Indiana DNR and state legislature. Um, and each one of those species has their own impact that fits into that harm to human health, harm to the environment, or harm to the economy. Um, and those are just these 120 species are just our regulated and officially recognized species. There's an organization called EdMaps, and they're an industry leader for invasive species mapping and monitoring. And EdMaps recognizes over 800 positively identified invasive or non-native species throughout the state, and that includes plants, animals, insects, fungi, and even pathogens. So, what makes them so invasive? There's a lot of different things that can make invasive species so invasive and so prevalent in our society, in our environment, and these are just some of them. But a lot of times, our species exhibit more than one characteristic. So this down here is Asian bush honeysuckle, which takes over a wood line, and we're probably all very familiar with seeing it, whether you know it or not. A lot of times it's in our hedgerows, between houses, along the edges of parks, along the edges of the roads, things like that. And you see it just about every day, whether you recognize it or not. And Asian bush honeysuckle fits multiple of these different characteristics. It fits that chemical warfare or allelopathy down here. It has aggressive growth rates. It has high reproductive rates. Lack of natural pests. There's not a lot of different things that snack on honeysuckle. Difficult to control or eradicate. It can definitely pop back up really quickly and really hits a lot of these different factors. And that's just one of these species. So what's the big deal? Why does it matter? Isn't all green good? What's the difference between an invasive species and a native species as far as our insects are concerned? And the reason why it matters is because invasive species just do not support the same number of invasive plants don't support the same number of insects that our natives do. So here on the left, we've got a series of invasive species here, and between all five of these species, we've only got we've only got 15 species of insects supported throughout all of North America. But in their homelands, where they come from, they support over 683 different insect species. So that's quite a drop. And it's not that our insects just haven't figured out how to use them. Some of these species, some of these invasive plants have been here for decades or hundreds of years. And it's just that we have not had the evolutionary time for these insects to actually learn how to use them and to be able to use them. And then over here on the right here, we've got some native trees and the number of species that those support. And I think those numbers just kind of speak for themselves. 15 species between 5 invasives versus 2,200 species between these different native plants. And yes, there may be a little bit of not an exact comparison because these are trees, and the ones on the left, a lot of these are we do have a couple trees in here, but a lot of these are more herbaceous. But Phragmites australis, which the common name for that is giant reed, that is our invasive species of Phragmites australis, but we have a very, very similar native Phragmites, and that native Phragmites supports over 40 different insects there. So even just those two plants that are very similar, with minimal differences, there's even a big difference in the number of insects that they support. So how do they spread? They're here, they're bad. How do they actually make it around? There's a lot of different ways that invasive species spread. This is just a few of our more common spread vectors here in the state, or in the country rather. And some of them may seem a little obvious, like an exotic species trade, but a lot of our invasive species first to make their appearance actually through the landscape industry, or they may hitch a ride along food imports or in other shippings, and then they get moved around by human and animal activity they get moved around through human and animal activity or through our river systems, and some of them can even be airborne. So there's couple different ways. There's intentional spread, and that can be food for livestock, which one that fits under that would be the invasive species kudzu. You might have heard of it as the vine that ate the South. Um, Biological pest control, that is where we take insects that are designed or thought to feed on a specific plant, a specific pest plant that we have here, and then they hope that we control those. Australia introduced something called the cane toad into their sugarcane fields, because they had what was called the cane fly, and that cane toad then became its own new nuisance and invasive species. So they can come in through biological pest control. And then we mentioned earlier the landscaping trade. So ornamentals and gardens are a really big one, especially here in Hamilton County. Um, and one example of that might be creeping Jenny, which a lot of times we see in planters, especially hanging planters. And then a lot of times when people are done with their creeping Jenny planters, they may take it and throw it into a woodlot near their house, whether they're supposed to or not. That's how they dispose of that. And once it's out there in the woodlot, it takes over. Um, And then erosion control. An example of that would be our invasive Lespedeza or our Asian bush clover, which was planted specifically to reduce erosion, and it maybe grew a little too well and became an invasive species. There's a lot of different reasons why we bring these in, that aren't just on this slide. We can bring them in for living fences, algae control, turf grass, or even turf grass alternatives. And then there's also the release of exotic pets, taking a fish and releasing it into the wild rather than, if you don't want it anymore. Um, and a lot of times we just didn't realize or know the potential impacts. Otherwise, people probably wouldn't have released them into the wild. Um, but so, what's that lesson for us? It's probably best to not intentionally introduce non-native species, especially without extensive research, into knowing exactly, do they have any predators here in our environment, things like that. And without that extensive research, it's probably best to just not introduce any non-native species. Um, and it's good to exercise caution as always. Lots of non-native insects, pathogens, or even just non-native plants themselves come through in the nursery stock, because a vast majority of plants on the market have not necessarily had these impact studies, and investigations done to understand what their impact into our environment is going to be. They're brought over, they're bred, they're sold, with not a whole ton of thought put into how much are they going to spread sometimes. So definitely be aware, of what you're buying from the nurseries, and ensuring that it's not something that's going to spread. And a lot of times, just because something isn't listed as an invasive species right now today, that doesn't mean that it can't become an invasive species and it can't be listed as one in the future. So we got unintentional spread as well as intentional spread. These are things that can come in, through packaging materials or contaminants in soil and mulch. They can travel along riverways. Um, a really nasty invasive in southern Indiana, called Japanese stilt grass, was used as packaging materials in like large shipping crates rather than use packing peanuts. And if it's dried out, it's not going to spread, but it's thought that stilt grass specifically, that there was some live samples that were in there, or some viable seeds that came along with that stilt grass, and then when the shipping container was thrown out, the stilt grass spread. Contaminants in soil and mulch. Really big one right now in Hamilton County is the Asian jumping worm. That one can be spread around through soils and it can come in your potted plants. And I guess I should say with a caveat on all of these species that um, we don't have time necessarily on this presentation to get into the ways to identify or remediate all of these different invasive species, but there are ways to check for Asian jumping worm and ways to make sure that you're hopefully not bringing that in. So if you're interested in that, there will be our contact information at the end if you're interested in any of these species specifically or learning more about what you can do with these specific species. Then our contact information will be at the end, and we'd be happy to answer any of those questions. And we also have our question and answer at the end of this, so we can do our best to answer then as well. Um, Seed mixes. There's a lot of different seed mixes out there for birds specifically. Generally, those do not contain invasive seed, and they're supposed to be relatively non-viable. But how many of us have ever had a bird feeder and seen sunflowers pop up and out of that? So they definitely do come through those seed mixes. Um, and then ballast water, zebra mussels comes right through, comes specifically out of ballast water, which is the water in the bottom of a ship that they use to provide more bottom weight and help the ship stay upright. Um, both of these, whether it's intentional or unintentional, these are ways that species can both enter a region for the first time as well as spread throughout it. So it might be that they initially come in through, like in the case of zebra mussels, for example, they initially come in through ballast water, but then they're spread on our boats and through other human activity in that way. So just because they enter in one way doesn't mean they can't spread in a variety of ways. Real quick in the chat, after we've gone through some different spread mechanisms that can happen throughout the United States, what are some spread methods that can happen specifically here in Hamilton County? You can drop your answers in the chat, or if you want to shout them out loud, that's fine as well. Yeah, pet paws. Clay brought up a really good point. Our pets can spread lots of invasive seed inadvertently just by walking through an area. So definitely good to check their paws as you're going in or out of a nature area. Yep. Vehicles, birds, lawnmowers, definitely a big one. Especially sometimes um, lawnmowers or mowing down invasives can be listed as a treatment method. So it's definitely important to make sure that if you take your lawnmower through an invasive species to intentionally cut it down, that you don't then drive it somewhere else with all that invasive seed in the lawnmower. Wind, yep, wind is a big one. We've got lots of airborne seeds or insects that just fly from one place to another. Yep, dirty gardening tools, just like the mowers. Dirty gardening tools can definitely spread invasive species. Um, whether you're digging in your own garden or if you're out specifically removing invasives, it's good to make sure that your tools are cleaned before they go to the next area, especially if you're transporting them from one yard to another. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that they can spread here. Another really big one would be tourism. We get a lot of traffic and tourism in and out of Hamilton County. I-69 runs right through the center of the county, and lots of people coming from around the state there. 465, of course, on the bottom side of the county, and then all the major routes all through it as well. So those can all bring lots of invasives, or those could bring invasives on those tires and just on the cars themselves. We've got a lot of horse traffic and horse trails in the county. So just like pet paws and deer, horses can transport invasives as well. Trains are a really, really big one. Trains and railroads and rail lines all can really help to spread invasives, because not only is the train moving from one location to another, but they've all and the invasive species can hitch a ride on the outside of the train, but sometimes we might be transporting things that could have invasive species inside the train itself. And then also the rail lines provide really good disturbed edge habitat that invasive species like to grow on, and like to grow in. You'll see a lot of tree of heaven along railways. So there's a lot of different ways that they can move around the country and around the state, and especially within Hamilton County itself. So I want to take a moment to look at two different species that you may have heard of in the news, because they're really big ones in the invasive species world. And we'll take a look at one species which has been around for a little while and already established in parts of the United States, and another that's very much an up and coming invasive, especially here in Indiana. Um, so kudzu, a lot of us have heard of kudzu, which is the vine that ate the South. And from this picture here, may be difficult to tell exactly what kudzu is, but it is every single one of these pillars, which are likely tree trunks under here. All of these pillars of vegetation and all across the bottom, this is all kudzu, which is where it gets one of the ways it gets its name, the vine that ate the South, because it climbs up the sides of trees and shrubs, and anywhere that it can, grows across the tops of the canopies, and then essentially chokes out the canopy and doesn't allow it to get the light that it needs. Um, So, in kudzu is actually an example of intentional distribution. It was brought to the American South to stabilize soil and reduce erosion, and it was promoted and subsidized by the USDA from the 30s to the 50s. And that rate, it was subsidized at up to $8 an acre, which in 1935, $8 an acre is about $190 per acre today. So that's no small amount of money. And they originally brought it, again, to stabilize soil and reduce erosion, because in the 30s we were coming out of the Great Dust Bowl. So there was a lot of concern throughout the country about making sure that our soil and water resources were locked in and very much taken care of. So holding soil on site became a very big and important thing, and kudzu was seen as a perfect solution to that. The reason being is that it can grow up to a foot a day, with mature vines up to 100 feet long. So a foot a day is quite a lot of plant growth. Um, and as it grows, it reproduces primarily through overground runners. And each time a node of one of these runners touches back down to the soil, it sets down new roots. So not only is that initial start of the vine producing roots, but all along its extent, it's getting new roots through the whole thing. And then, as we saw from that first picture, it is a very, very densely growing plant. So it was planted in farm fields. It was planted along riverways. It was planted along railways and train lines. And it was actively planted and subsidized until the mid 50s throughout the South and dispersed areas along the East Coast. And then once the subsidization, once it stopped being subsidized, people stopped planting it. Um, and once they stopped planting it and actively managing it, then it kind of went out of control. It was in all of these areas and it had been actively established. And then now that there was no management, it was able to just out of control grow. Um, so, what does kudzu look like today? Where is it? Where's it spread? Where's it at? It's all throughout the American South. It started its initial populations were down here in Georgia, Alabama, North, South Carolina. Those were its initial populations, where all that deepest, darkest green is. And then since the 50s, it has spread all throughout the southeastern and all the way up to the northeastern part of the United States. And you may notice this population way out here in Oregon. So it's got a nice little satellite population across the country as well. And here's just another example of what that vine can look like. Everything that you're seeing here, this is all kudzu growing up the sides of trees. So it's established in the South. We've learned that it was spread through intentional means, intentionally planted, and then once the management stopped, it was allowed. It just grew out of control and did what it does best, which is growing up to a foot a day. And so that's how it did its initial spread. So in Indiana, where we're at, these are the Indiana DNR mapped locations of known kudzu. And I believe this one is as of December of 2024. So this is where we're at in Indiana. It is it's starting to establish pretty well in the southern part of the state, but up here in the central part of the state, right about here was where we are. It's not established yet. We don't have a lot of populations here just yet. And the ones that we have that we know of are being actively managed by the DNR. So that puts us, there's a really neat graphic here, and this is called the invasion curve. That what this is trying to show is you've got your introduction of an invasive species all the way down here, and our axes are area infested versus time. And then as area infested goes up, control costs also go up. So down here, all the way introduction, that would have been back in the 30s when they were initially trying to establish it. And then the South is all the way up here, all the way into local control and management. It is highly unlikely that they'll ever eradicate that population. And if they do, it's not going to be until after extensive work is put into it. Here in Indiana, we might be a little bit closer down here on this bottom side of the curve, especially up in the center part of the state. So it's important to not wait until a species is already established, because those control costs go up. Right now, when we only have a couple populations around us that we know of, now is a perfect time to be worrying about it. Our second species that I want to look at is the spotted lanternfly, which is making big headlines out east. And if you haven't heard of it yet here in Indiana, unfortunately, you may start to. So spotted lanternfly is an active infestation, and it's actively moving throughout the eastern part of the United States. And so let's look a little bit into what this bug is, where it spreads, and how it does that. Spotted lanternfly is a sapsucker that goes after trees, vines, and bushes with a high flow of sugary saps. It goes after a lot of different species, but as long as it's got lots of sugary saps flowing, that's what it's going to gravitate towards. Um, and just a few of those spotted lanternfly can cause declines in the tree, and you can start to see the effects. But oftentimes, spotted lanternfly doesn't just, it's not just one or two, it's a couple dozen or 100 or 1,000, and these swarms in this increase in these increased numbers can severely decline a full grown tree or even kill it. um, Spotted lanternfly isn't just growing in the woods; it's growing kind of everywhere. The populations are moving and thriving everywhere in neighborhoods and vineyards and all different places alike. Um, so it decreases the vitality of the host species, that tree, the vine, whatever it's growing on. Um, and it also destroys the surrounding area. It produces as the spotted lanternfly feeds, it excretes a sticky and sugary liquid called honeydew. And that honeydew, as it drops out of the trees from the spotted lanternfly, it leaves behind a shiny and sticky residue that can attract more insects and promotes a sodium mold growth, which can further harm plants by reducing their ability to photosynthesize. And then you've also got mold growing in and around it. Um, and that honeydew just falls on whatever's underneath it. So wherever the spotted lanternfly is in the tree, it falls down on anything that's underneath it. And this can be landscaping, it can be cars, sidewalks, homes, other infrastructure, and the mold grows on all of those surfaces as well, which makes it difficult to clean, and pretty gross to look at as well. Um, Although spotted lanternfly prefers tree of heaven, um, which is another invasive species and that grows in the same native region as the spotted lanternfly. It's a pretty indiscriminate feeder, and it'll feed on over 70 different plant species. But what is a big concern to us, as humans who consume, is its impact on our grapevines and our apples. So it's impacting fruit grapes that you buy in the grocery store. It will impact wine quantities and flavor as well. It impacts apples and all of their byproducts. So it's a really big concern in the agricultural community. And it's a little early to have a ton of definitive numbers and like measurable numbers on exactly the impact that it's having on vineyards, but institutions across the board are warning fruit producers that spotted lanternfly poses to their crops. So how does it move? Um, it was first it was first identified in Berks County, Pennsylvania, which is this red dot down here, back in 2014. Spotted lanternfly, despite its name, doesn't really fly very much. It's mostly a plant hopper, and it would probably struggle to fly from the end of one room to another, in most cases. It can kind of do short flight stints. It's a very close relative of grasshoppers. So if you think of how a grasshopper moves around and the short flight that it has, it's very similar to that. Um, and on its own, it really doesn't move very far or very fast. But with inadvertent help from humans, it can expand its range rapidly. And the big key to this are its egg masses. They're small and hard to find, and they can be easily mistaken for bark or lichen, which is a something that grows on trees. Or it can even just look like mud. So here we got three examples. Um, on this one on what looks like a deck or a set of stairs, this one here on a tree, and then this one just on some other pieces of wood. And it grows on kind of any vertical surface. It doesn't have to just be wood, but it can grow on a wide range of vertical surfaces as well. And I don't know about you, but if I didn't know to look for this, and I walked past any of these examples, I probably wouldn't think too much about it. Maybe I'd scrape it off if I thought it was mud and didn't want it to be muddy. But if I was walking by this tree and I didn't know what I was looking for, there's not a chance in the world that I would think twice about it. So that's why it's important to know what we're looking for and to be able to identify that. And it does definitely take intentional looking for them. um, so like I said, it lays its eggs on nearly any hard surface, so that can be trees or firewood, construction and shipping materials, vehicles, and so much more. Each of these egg sacs can hold 30 to 50 eggs in a single 1 inch patch, and each female lays two masses per year per reproductive cycle. um, it was originally thought to have come to Indiana on on a family's vehicle who moved here from Pennsylvania. So that kind of gets us into the next point. How does an egg mass laid by an insect that can barely fly from one side of the room to the other make its way from Pennsylvania all the way throughout the eastern part of the United States, all the way from to Illinois and Iowa, all in less than 15 years? Well, it comes back to planes, trains, and automobiles. It's all on it. It grows on the sides of cars, on the sides of trains, planes, boats. They'll even lay their eggs on a bicycle, on the firewood that you have, which you may be familiar with our with campaigns out there to not move firewood from one place to another. Especially when you're talking about state fair or state parks and state campgrounds. You'll hear that said a lot, and it's not because the state parks want to make money off the firewood. It's because they don't want these invasive pests to be brought in. So just to be safe, they ask to you not move your firewood around. So how do we stop the infestations? There's a lot of different ways that they come in, but how do we actually take efforts to reduce the spread or slow them down? A really big one here is reducing our disturbances on the environment. Every amount of stress that we put into the environment just weakens its ability to recover a little bit. Our planet is very, very resilient and can withstand a lot of pressure, but just like anything else, it breaks under too much stress. So this is in the form of deforestation and construction sites, and even pollution, intentional introduction of invasive species. And then otherwise just destroying our natural ecosystems can all make it harder for our environment to recover when there are additional stressors and pressures put onto it. Um, on construction sites, especially new construction, which is a very big theme in Hamilton County. As we all know, there's lots and lots of new construction happening every day, every year. The county seems to grow almost by the minute. So and that's impossible to stop. We're never going to stop new construction. We're never going to stop this growth. But what we can do is use better management practices to limit the needless disturbance of land, and then also to reestablish native plants on it, on disturbed land once we're done with it. And whenever possible, it is just a better management practice to cover bare soil with plant material, or to hold it down in any way possible. And if you can use native vegetation to do so, that's even better. Um, And then on that soil disturbance note, when possible, if you're at home gardening, try not to rip roots fully out of the ground if you don't need to. Um, Sometimes it's better to let the roots decay naturally rather than creating a bunch of disturbed earth. And then returning native plants to the home landscape. A lot of in a lot of our areas, a lot of our neighborhoods, they're relatively barren for our native insects, native birds, any of our native species to develop in. Um, so if we can return native plants to our home landscape through landscaping and through plantings and medians, then that can all really help our ecosystem recover once it is disturbed. Um, Another thing that you can do is just be careful of what you're purchasing at the nurseries, avoiding exotic species and non-native cultivars whenever possible. Um, and a lot of times, new invasive species come from the landscaping trade. And like I said earlier, just because it's not currently listed as invasive, just because it's not currently on any of our lists, doesn't mean that it's safe to plant and that it can't become one of our next big invasive species. So whenever possible, it's good to purchase native. Aquariums, terrariums, and houseplants are really fun additions to our homes and offices. And I've got plenty of plants here in my own house as well. But if you do have exotic species that you're growing in the house, it's important to make sure that they don't enter our environment, at least that they're not able to grow once they enter the environment. So if you have any questions on how to appropriately dispose of those and make sure that they aren't going to spread when you do dispose of them, you can contact Hamilton County Soil and Water, or if you're not in the county, you can contact your local SWCD for some advice and guidance on how to properly dispose of that. Um, and then being cautious at big box stores and nurseries. So we talked about this a little bit already, but a lot of times these, whether it's a big box store or even the smaller nursery, they carry non-natives and even invasives. There are definitely still invasive species, registered invasive species. I'm sorry, recognized invasive species that are for sale on the shelves. So it's good to understand where a plant is coming from. And if you can't verify that that plant is coming from Indiana or Hamilton County, and isn't native here, it's oftentimes better to err on the side of caution. And if you have any questions about where those species are coming from and aren't able to quite figure it out, we can help out with that as well. One of the things that in kind of the line of what Hamilton County can do to help with your native landscaping, our office developed native landscaping plans a few years ago now, and those are designed to show how to best grow native species and what native species to put in specific locations. And that uses a template landscape, a template home, um, and kind of lays out exactly where you can put different natives and what would work in different areas. And it does that for the residential landscape as well as we have some stuff for the HOA landscape, so our medians and entryways and things like that. And then we also have a resource on where you can actually purchase these native and invasive species on our website. Um, another thing that we can do to help against invasive species is to manage those new infestations as soon as possible. And that can be new species that haven't been in our environment, that haven't been in Hamilton County before at all, or it can be a new population of a previously known invasive species. So either way, stopping those new populations from growing is one of the easiest ways that we can stop the spread. And then taking steps to minimize that accidental transport. So cleaning your boats and your tires and everything once you've been in a native or in a natural area. Um, Cleaning your boots, lawn equipment, all that good stuff can be really important. And then if you there are a lot of times certified invasive free products, um, and those can also be good alternatives as well. One way that you can help keep your equipment clean, specifically your boots, when you're at parks around the county, you may see one of these stands at a trailhead, and these are boot brush stations installed by HIP and the SWCD. And down here at the very bottom is a boot brush that you can swipe your boots off real quick before you enter the native area, and then as well on your way out, just in case there happened to be something there as well. So that's a lot about how invasive species move and what we can do. There's a lot of groups, even just in the county, that are working on this issue. So definitely a big shout out to all of our partners. And there are so many people that are working on this issue here in the county. There's no way that we could possibly put everybody on one page, but these are absolutely some of our big partners. And then what can you do? So we mentioned that March is Invasive Species Action Month. There's lots of volunteer opportunities this month, especially, but all throughout the year. And so we have those strike teams, weed wrangles. You're able to volunteer for the Indian and Native Plant Society, as well as any of those other organizations. You're able to map and report invasive species. So EdMaps and HipMap, which are two different mapping programs that we use to track invasive species. EdMaps is a publicly accessible one, and HipMap is it's a different program that's run by our office. If you want to learn more about that, I'm happy to chat about it. And then if you do find invasive species, especially the spotted lanternfly, or even just think that you have, you can report that to 866 No Exotic to the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. And then spread the word. Being vocal and talking to those around you about invasive species, and if it's important to you, talking to them about it. There may be 10 other people in the room with you that think invasive species are important, and you may not ever know until you talk to them. Shopping smart, making sure that we're buying native, and especially not buying things that are already known invasives. Writing your politicians, and then again, buy native down there. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything that we can now in the chat, or if you want to turn on your mic and speak out, we can definitely answer any questions that you may have. And then if you think of something later, or if you'd rather write it out, our contact information is just right here.
Right. It's like Kim's typing. Awesome. It was
Thank
great. No. Give it another second. See if anybody has any questions they're working on. All right. I think mostly just praise, Jacob. Yeah, it's great. I think invasive species spread is always a warning and call to action. I think you covered all of that tonight. So, yeah, well, I mean, we'll hang around for another minute or two just in case anybody has any questions. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Jacob. That was great. And we'll follow up with an email tomorrow that has the slides and maybe some other links and resources. But yeah, thanks for taking your time to spend an hour or so out of your evening with us. And we hope we see you at an Invasive Species Action Month event. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, there's a good question here in the chat about, are there any native plants or websites that would show what might replace non-natives like burning bush? There's a lot of different resources out there. One of my favorite resources is the Indiana Native Plant Society's Native Plant Finder. And we'll see if we can get that link in the chat.
I'll grab it, Jacob.
We have resources on our website as well, but I really enjoy that Native Plant Finder because it'll allow you to filter by your type of environment. It's so you can filter your type of like how much sunlight you have, what your soil moisture is like, a bunch of different metrics on there, even down to what type of plant you're looking for. So that's a really good starting place. They're definitely still building out that program. There's a lot more species that can go on there, but it's a really good starting place for sure. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we'll close things down. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.